Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and flowing streams, there lived an old woman who was known throughout the region for three remarkable qualities: her profound wisdom, her boundless kindness, and most notably, her unwavering happiness. Her small cottage at the edge of the village, with its vibrant garden and welcoming porch, had become a sanctuary for troubled souls seeking guidance or simply a moment of peace. The villagers adored her. Children would bring her wildflowers and stay to hear her stories. Adults would visit with their burdens, leaving lighter than when they arrived. There was something magical about her presence, not in any supernatural sense, but in the way she made everyone feel understood and valued. Her laughter was like a melody that seemed to chase away the darkest clouds, and her eyes held a sparkle that spoke of a deep, unshakable joy. One particularly beautiful spring morning, a young man named Thomas made his way up the winding path to her cottage. Thomas was known in the village as a hard-working farmer, but lately he had been struggling with a heaviness of spirit that he couldn't seem to shake. Life had dealt him several difficult blows in recent months: a failed harvest, the loss of his favorite horse, and a falling out with his brother over land boundaries. As he approached the cottage, he found the old woman tending to her garden, humming softly as she worked. Despite her advanced age, her movements were deliberate and graceful, her back bent not from weariness, but from devotion to the earth beneath her fingers. "Good morning, Thomas," she called out without looking up, somehow knowing it was him. "The chamomile is particularly fragrant today. Would you care for some tea?" Thomas nodded, taking a seat on the wooden bench beside her garden. He watched as she gathered some fresh herbs, noting how she seemed to take pleasure in this simple task. After preparing the tea inside, she returned with 2 steaming cups and settled beside him. "Something troubles you," she said. It wasn't a question. Thomas sighed deeply. "I've been watching you for years," he began. "Through droughts and harsh winters, through the fever that swept through the village last year, even when your own granddaughter moved to the city, you remain unchanged, always smiling, always at peace." He looked at her with genuine confusion in his eyes. "Why are you always happy, no matter what happens? Don't you ever feel sad or angry or afraid? Are you somehow immune to the pains of life that affect the rest of us?" The old woman's eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled, not with pride or amusement, but with understanding. She set her tea down and turned to face him fully. "My dear Thomas," she began, her voice soft yet clear as a mountain stream, "I am not immune to pain. I have felt sorrow so deep it seemed to hollow out my very bones. I have known anger that burned like fire in my veins. I have trembled with fears that kept me awake through countless nights." She paused, looking out over the village below. "But I have learned that happiness is not the absence of these feelings. It is something far more profound." Thomas leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you mean?" The old woman's eyes grew distant, as if looking back through the corridors of time. "Let me tell you a story, my story," she said. "When I was young, not much older than you are now, I had a small but happy family. My husband, Jacob, was a carpenter with skilled hands and a kind heart. We had 2 beautiful children who filled our home with laughter. We weren't wealthy by any measure. Our cottage was smaller than this one, and we often had to be creative with our meals when money was tight. But we were content with what we had, and our home was rich with love." She took a sip of her tea before continuing. "Then one winter, Jacob began to cough. At first, we thought nothing of it, just a common cold that would pass, but it didn't pass. It grew worse. His strong frame became thin, his face pale. He struggled to work, then to get out of bed." Her voice wavered slightly, the memory still vivid after all these years. "We needed medicine, expensive medicine from the city. I sold what I could, but it wasn't enough. The children and I foraged for herbs that might help, but his illness was beyond what simple remedies could cure. I watched helplessly as he grew weaker day by day." Thomas noticed that despite the sadness in her voice, there was no bitterness, no anger at the unfairness of it all. On a cold night in February, with snow piling against our windows and the wind howling like a mourner, Jacob took his last breath. He was holding my hand, and he tried to smile at me one last time. She paused, and Thomas saw that her eyes had misted over. "It was the saddest day of my life, Thomas. The pain was indescribable, like part of my own self had been torn away. I cried until I had no tears left. I was certain that I would never feel happiness again." Thomas remained silent, moved by her story and surprised by her openness about such profound grief. "For weeks afterward, I merely existed. I fed my children, I kept our home, I did what needed to be done, but I was like a shadow moving through the world. Everything seemed gray and meaningless. I I resented the sun for continuing to rise, the birds for continuing to sing when my world had collapsed. She looked at Thomas directly now. But then something changed. Not suddenly, but gradually, like the slow melting of snow in spring. I realized that my sadness, as vast and deep as it was, could not change what had happened. Jacob was gone, and no amount of tears would bring him back. My children still needed me, not just my physical presence, but my love, my guidance, my strength. Life, with all its beauty and pain, was continuing to flow, and I was standing still, drowning in my sorrow. The old woman reached out and touched a blooming rose in her garden. I made a decision then, Thomas, not to forget my grief or to pretend it didn't exist, but to change how I related to it. Every morning when I woke up, I would find one thing, just one small thing to appreciate. Perhaps it was the way the morning light filtered through our window, or the sound of my daughter's laughter, or the taste of fresh bread. I trained my eyes and my heart to look for beauty, for goodness, for reasons to be grateful. Thomas frowned slightly. But isn't that just ignoring the bad things? Pretending they don't exist? The old woman shook her head firmly. Not at all. It's about perspective, about where you choose to place your attention. The difficult things in life don't disappear. They are part of the tapestry of our existence. But they don't have to be the only threads we see. She continued. Over time, this practice became second nature to me. I began to notice how my perception shaped my experience. When I focused on what I had lost, I felt empty and bereft. When I focused on what remained, my children, my community, the beauty of the world, I felt rich beyond measure. Thomas considered her words. But what if something truly terrible happens? Something that can't be balanced by noticing a pretty flower or a nice sunset. How can you still be happy then? The old woman nodded, acknowledging the weight of his question. There are indeed moments of profound suffering in life that cannot be easily offset. In those darkest times, happiness as we typically understand it may not be possible or even appropriate. But even then, we have a choice about how we carry our pain. She leaned forward, her eyes intense with conviction. Everything passes, Thomas, even the worst moments. This is one of life's great truths. When we are in the midst of suffering, it can feel eternal, as if the darkness will never lift. But it does. It always does. The human spirit has an extraordinary capacity for resilience. She continued, when bad things happen, we have a choice. We can focus exclusively on our pain and sadness, allowing it to consume us, or we can acknowledge our suffering while still remaining open to the good that exists alongside it. Happiness, as I've come to understand it, isn't about feeling joyful all the time. It's about maintaining an inner peace, a fundamental okayness, even when life is difficult. Thomas sat quietly, absorbing her words. The concept seemed simple, yet profoundly challenging. Happiness is a choice, she said gently. Not in a way that dismisses genuine suffering or suggests that we should just think positive and all will be well. Rather, it's a choice about how we orient ourselves toward life, all of life, with its joys and sorrows, its gains and losses. We can choose to be defined by what hurts us, or we can choose to be defined by how we respond to what hurts us. The young man nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So when you say you're always happy, you don't mean you're always feeling cheerful or that bad things don't affect you. Exactly, she smiled. There are days when my joints ache so badly I can barely tend my garden. There are nights when I miss Jacob so intensely that tears still come, even after all these years. There are times when I worry about my granddaughter in the city, or when I feel the loneliness of old age. I feel all of these things fully, but beneath them there's a current of acceptance, of trust in life's process, of knowing that whatever comes, I can face it with an open heart. Thomas looked down at his hands, calloused from farm work. I think I understand, but how do I begin? Sometimes it feels like the weight of everything is too much. The old woman reached out and placed her weathered hand over his. Start small, my dear. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, before you even get out of bed, think of one thing you're grateful for. Just one. The next day, try for two. Notice the way the light falls across your fields, or how your dog greets you with such joy, or the satisfaction of work well done. She continued, when difficulties arise, and they will, acknowledge them honestly. Feel what you need to feel. But then ask yourself, is there another way I could look at this situation? Is there something I can learn here? Is there still beauty to be found alongside this pain? Thomas thanked her sincerely for her wisdom and her story. As he walked back down the path toward his farm, he felt something shift inside him. Not a dramatic transformation, but a small opening, a possibility. In the days that followed, Thomas began to practice what the old woman had suggested. At first, it felt awkward, even forced. But gradually, he noticed a change. The weight he had been carrying didn't disappear entirely, but it became lighter, more manageable. He found himself noticing things he had overlooked before: the particular blue of the sky after a rain, the satisfaction of seeing seeds he had planted begin to sprout, the comfort of his mother's cooking. When his neighbor's cow broke through the fence and trampled part of his newly planted field, something that would have previously sent him into a rage, he still felt frustrated, but he was able to see beyond that initial reaction. He recognized that the damage was limited, that he could replant, that his neighbor was genuinely apologetic and offered to help with repairs. Word of Thomas's change spread throughout the village. Others who had noticed his newfound equanimity asked him about it, and he shared the old woman's wisdom. Soon, more villagers began to visit her, seeking to understand her philosophy of happiness. The old woman welcomed them all, sharing her story and her simple yet profound approach to life. She never presented herself as having all the answers or being without struggles. Instead, she offered her experience as a possibility, an invitation to see life differently. Over time, a subtle transformation took place in the village. People began to support each other more readily during hardships, knowing that suffering was universal, but that it could be carried with grace. They celebrated small joys more intentionally, recognizing that happiness wasn't found only in grand moments, but in the texture of everyday life. Children learned from their parents and grandparents that emotions were to be felt and honored, but that they always had a choice about how to respond to life's circumstances. The village became known in the region not for any material prosperity, but for the quality of life and the resilience of its people. Years later, when the old woman finally passed away peacefully in her sleep, the entire village gathered to honor her. Thomas, now middle-aged with children of his own, spoke at her memorial. She taught us that happiness isn't about what happens to us, but about how we choose to see and respond to what happens, he said, his voice strong with emotion. She showed us that even in our darkest moments, we can find light if we're willing to look for it. Her gift to us wasn't just her wisdom, but the example of her life, a life that knew great sorrow but chose again and again to embrace joy. As the seasons continued to change and new generations were born in the village, the old woman's story remained alive. Parents told their children about her, and those children told their children. Her simple philosophy, that happiness is a choice we make each day, regardless of our circumstances, became woven into the cultural fabric of the community. And so the legacy of the old woman lived on, not in monuments or material wealth, but in the hearts and minds of the villagers who had learned from her that life will always have its ups and downs. But if we cherish the little things, hold on to hope, and choose happiness, we will always find light, even in the darkest days. In a world that often measures success by external achievements and material possessions, the old woman's wisdom offers a different perspective. That true wealth lies in our capacity to find joy in simple pleasures, to maintain inner peace amid life's storms, and to choose, again and again, to orient ourselves toward gratitude and hope rather than bitterness and despair. Her story reminds us that happiness isn't something that happens to us when everything is perfect. It's a way of engaging with life as it is, beautiful and painful, joyful and sorrowful, always changing yet somehow always containing the possibility of meaning and grace. It's available to all of us, not despite our struggles, but alongside them, if only we have the courage to choose it.